It's time to translate the science, data, and research behind dairy cattle genetics into real-world applications for farmers around the globe. Brought to you by the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding, the CDCB CowCast begins now. Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of the CDCB CowCast. I am your host, Katie Schmidt, and I'm joined by a familiar face in the CDCB world, Mr. Matt Hendel of Hendel Farms, LLC in Caledonia, Minnesota. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for the invite. I always look forward to discussing genetics and working with the council on different aspects of promotion of genetics. So glad to be here.
Yeah, we've had a few conversations between the two of us about these topics over the years through your service on the Producer Advisory Committee, but also as a fellow Minnesotan to myself. So we go way back, if you will. And I'm excited for you to first introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners. Tell us about the farm, Matt, and what some of those genetic selection goals are that you have within your herd.
Well, Hendel Farms has been in business since 1867. My great-grandfather came over and started this operation, and my brother and I had a partnership, and we developed the herd from a 35 cow Brown Swiss herd to now we have 400 Holsteins and about 25 Brown Swiss. We've always kind of had an interest in breeding better animals in the registered side of things and making a contribution to the genetic population of the breed around the world is always been an interest of mine, and my father and his father before that exported a lot of cattle overseas and stuff with the Brown Swiss. So that's kind of how I got started in that aspect. We've had a lot of really good help along the way with our employees and many long-term employees that have had an interest in genetics. I like to try to get people interested in genetics and see. It's just so fun to watch it evolve and make your selections work in your herd to make improvements in the areas you see that you need to do. And of course, my wife Pam has been involved in the AI industry and dairy industry in general all of her career. And now my daughter Lauren has an interest in the farm. She helps on the farm. She's interested in the genetics also and does a lot of work with genetics. I would say our goals breeding now are to make more efficient cattle for the farm, long-lasting cows. Basically, like it or not, we're trying to reduce the footprint of our production in the industry around the world. So we have more efficient cattle that are easier to maintain, easier for people to take care of, which results in greater efficiency, less use of antibiotics, and it's just all the way around just a better system. And the fact that we've seen so many improvements in these areas through the use of genetic selection across the national herd it's really exciting to me to see. And as new traits are developed and we try to decide how to use those traits in the system and we adjust traits that we've been using, there's just a lot of importance. And being on the PAC committee, coming up to another question, it's fun to be a part of that and watch the scientists reach out to us to get input from the breeder side, because it takes so much time to crunch these numbers to figure out the best formulas that they really enjoy getting input back from producers on the farm that are using these traits. And it's just been a really good system. I don't know, when was the PAC committee formed? I was on the first committee.
I believe it started in 2019.
Okay. So yeah, it's been fun to be a part of it. And they rotate in and out people, so we have a lot of new faces on the committee upcoming this year, which is exciting too. So
Yeah, and you're really setting the stage here well for us, Matt, because we're going to talk about the pack and we're going to talk about the input that you all offer as producers for that committee for the CDCB scientists and the USDA scientists. But before we get there, you were talking about those long term employees that have that interest in genetics and are working alongside you. How are you fostering that interest in genetics and teaching them as they learn and as they grow? What are some of the things you're doing to support them in that?
There's a lot of ways to go about it. And if you have somebody that's really interested in the registered cattle business or developing lines, they see, the best cows in the herd, and they see the profit potential in those animals, and they hear about how much that there's interest in them. We're selling embryos and stuff, and if they have a knack for genetics, then they just kind of are around. Usually my assistant herdsmen, they're the ones that are, or the herdsmen that I work with, are kind of with me as we're making decisions, bull decisions, and then they start to get a feel for why it's important. They can see the results and the type and the longevity, especially breeding. If somebody, a lot of guys that I've taught over the years, they see, well, these negative DPR animals, they don't breed very good. That's ridiculous. We gotta stop using the bad ones, and because they want to be successful. So then they start to key in on the health traits because it makes their job easier, and that's what we want because it's more efficient. And it's always a bad day if you happen to lose a cow from anything on the farm. We try to, for the use of livability and new traits similar to that, we've been able to reduce the effects of these things. That's what brings people in. They see the effects of what we're doing, and then it's kind of exciting to have people from different countries come and buy embryos and maybe sell a bold AI, and then they want to join in, become a partner in an animal or something. And through the years, we've had a lot of different partnerships, and you learn how to make them successful for everybody. They're not always successful, but it's something I like to do because anytime you work with partners, you're gaining extra help and information. So it's kind of addictive that way. You find somebody that's really has a lot of the same interests you do in breeding, buy an animal together, then you're communicating back and forth and sharing information. That's what makes it valuable to me, is the back and forth, so to speak.
So I think that interest that you have, Matt, in sharing ideas with your business partners is maybe a part of this too. I'm curious as to why you've taken the time to be involved in organizations that are looking for producer input and perspective. So whether that be CDCB through our producer advisory committee, or your time with Holstein Association or with the Brown Swiss Association, you really do share a lot of your time and your perspective with these organizations. So I'm curious as to why that is a priority for you.
Well, my time in college, I learned that networking is critical to your success. So if you find people that are the best in their field, and you learn from them. And dairy farmers especially are like the best of sharing information. I don't know why. There's not too many industries where we're as willing to share information between each other. Maybe it's I don't know, it's a pride thing. You want to tell people how good you do things. But I think it's mostly the fact that because there's always give and take. Every farm in the country is run differently. And I learned right away when I started breeding cows in college that on different farms that I never saw the same thing twice in a day. But I learned that there's different ways to do things, and you can't get that information from staying at home and just thinking you know best. You have to get out and talk to people and see it to develop the best skills. And by networking with the top producers in their fields of genetics or feeding management in different other areas. It's a win-win situation, and that's mainly why I enjoy being part of that. But I just feel like because I've learned so much from other people, I like to give back a little bit. Because the Holstein Association, when I was younger, I started spending a little time at the convention and got to know some of the more prominent breeders, and they were very accepting and kind of put me under their wing. A guy in California named Doug Maddox, I met him at a convention, and I thought, boy, this guy, he's really got it going. He was president at the time and got me on the genetic advancement committee. I was kind of a young fella, and then I met other board of directors, and through being on the genetic advancement committee, I started meeting geneticists with the USDA, and started asking those guys questions and hearing their stories and telling how in the US how they formulated proofs. And I just kept gaining more information, and it just got more addictive. And I sure learned a lot over the years from all these different people we've met. So it's been a lot of fun.
I heard recently on a podcast the phrase of you never want to be the smartest person in the room. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here, Matt, right? There's so much to learn when you network and when you put yourself in a room with other people. You get to share what you know, but you also get to learn so much from everyone else. And I'm wondering, in your years of service, thinking about the PAC exclusively right now, so the Producer Advisory Committee, I think we mentioned it started in 2019. You were initially on it. You left us for a couple of years. You're back. You're now the chair of that committee for this upcoming term. What are some of the topics that we've covered in the past with that group that you feel have brought additional value back to your farm? Things that you've been able to implement within the herd or maybe in conversation with your neighbors as you're networking and teaching younger people as well?
Well, the biggest takeaway message I learned was we need a data supply to make genomics work. Genomics can't predict the future without having past accurate data, okay? It's not a crystal ball. It's based on solid on-farm data. And if we're not collecting the data correctly, or we're not collecting it at all, or we're not sharing our data, we're missing the boat, okay? So we need to check with our DHIAs. We need to check with our testing associations. Usually you can tell pretty quickly if your fees for genomic testing are higher than the lowest. That means you're not contributing somewhere. So you need to find out where that is, where the missing link is. And once I learned that, I wasn't quite supplying data the way I thought I was, and I was able to get that data supplied accurately. But then from learning from that, it made me be a better data collector on my own farm, and with recording my hoof trimming in the computer. I didn't used to do that. I used to just keep a file in a notebook. Then I thought, well, then the hoof data or any lameness data, if I didn't record that a cow was lame, how are you going to get lameness data from no data? You can't. So you have to record it. And this data is invaluable. Our biggest concern within our herd is foot and legs, and making sure we have the best feet and legs to get those cattle to the bunk and be comfortable on our environment of cement that we put them on. One of the things that the council has been working on is foot health and mobility, and it's taking a little time because it's one of the most complex issues there is. The environmental effects on the trade are so huge from herd to herd. Just one little feeding difference, and too much mineral, not enough mineral, and just everything. And then the structure of the cow and how cows move, and it's a big challenge ahead. But getting back to the point is that these kind of things are what we talk about in the meeting. As producers, we come up with things. Like we had a discussion many years ago about calving ease, and we were thinking, how many calves do you pull compared to 30 years ago? We had this discussion amongst the producers, and well, we don't really have a problem with it. But any bull that was above average seemed like he was unusable. And then the geneticists decided, well, maybe we should look at that. And then they kind of came up with a better plan for calving ease, made it directly related to the actual calving ease problems within the population. And then it made a lot more bulls that were not a problem for calving ease much more available. But here again, that's progression over the last 30 years of using that data in a positive way.
Yeah, that calving ease revision is definitely a really good success story of feedback from the pack that made it into the CDCB scientist world, right? And the USDA scientist world, where we could evaluate what we're seeing based on the feedback that you're also telling us and then make adjustments to offer a better tool. And we see that play out again with like the reproductive traits this summer. So this type of grassroots feedback is huge for the organization. And I love that you mentioned the hoof health part, Matt, because you are like many producers, right, that are writing down the hoof events on a piece of paper, or the hoof trimmer has the data and it doesn't end up in the software system for the farm. And then it can't get to CDCB for a hoof health evaluation. So there's a big call for producers to record things like hoof health or calf health events in their on-farm software and make sure that you're sharing that with CDCB or with the National Cooperator Database for genetic evaluations in the future as we work towards those traits.
And just recording why cows are being culled. You know, some farms wouldn't record the reason for culling. She's just gone. But that gives us such a better idea. Because it's hard when you lose a cow, and if you don't record it as dead on the farm, then we don't get livability data.
The other caveat I'm just going to throw out there for viewers and listeners that you mentioned, Matt, that maybe everyone isn't familiar with, is that the genomic fee credits that exist, that you were talking about, those discounts on your genomic testing that are linked to contributing phenotypic data. So when producers are sending their yield data, so their milk, fat, protein, somatic cell, they're getting $2 off of their genomic testing for their females. And then when you also send health, it's another $1, and type evaluation's another $1. So if you are a full data provider for the National Cooperator Database for genetic evaluations, there's actually a complete waiving of CDCB fees attached to that genomic test. So that's a great way to kind of check to see if your data is making it into the database. And if it's not and you think it should be, it's a really good opportunity to go back and figure out what's happening somewhere in that data chain or that data flow that it's breaking down and not making it to its destination. So Matt, the next thing I want to know from you, we're getting close to hosting our first meeting of the PAC for this term. They're just elected here this spring. What are some of the topics, or one of the topics, you're really excited about discussing with that group?
Some of the discussion we've had recently with the last committee was looking into twinning rates and maybe developing some data on twinning, and just taking a look at it, because twinning is so costly to the producers, and it's not so good for the cows either, and right now it's not as bad as it used to be, because we can sell 2 calves that are worth a lot of money. But the death loss is so much higher in twins, and the cattle either can get thinner, or there's just so many things that can go wrong in the twinning things, early abortions in the dry period and things that are pretty costly. So I know they started working on it initially, and we'll see where that goes, because the twinning rate is definitely, in my opinion, heritable, because cows that have twins, their twins have twins, and their twins seem to have more twins. So it's a trait that, for my opinion, I've seen that there's got to be some heritability to it. But when they break it down, that's the beauty of having a whole population to look at. In my head, I get ideas sometimes within my herd that I think, oh, that's a strong case for that. That's true. But then when you get the real data across more herds,
just the whole picture, right?
Yeah, and you tend to see things that happen. I had a question on a bull to one of CDCB's top geneticists, Ezekiel, and I asked, this bull, why does his livability so low? And he goes, Well, because it's true. The data shows they're not getting sold off the farm. There's a higher percentage dying because they just seem to be set up so right for having a long life. But then we found they had a little Achilles heel with relation to hemorrhagic bowel syndrome. And once we know that through genomics, a lot of times we can see if the sons are prevalent to that gene or they're not. So then you focus on bulls that have a higher livability that are sons or grandsons of that bull because that that's a great thing about genomics. But anyway, that's a little off the subject, but it's kind of interesting. Another thing
Not
that
completely off the subject. Yeah.
another thing that we looked at and that the council has been working on and that the previous committee was really interested in was mobility and our ability to get mobility part of our program because we've made so much progress on udders, but the foot and leg issue and their mobility to get up and down seems to be the next thing we need to work on. I'll be excited to see in August once we get the new data back on because our committee will have time to digest the new cow conception rate, DPR, and then there's a new trait also. And once we get those numbers, then we can give input back as to how we feel that new process went. So we're kind of excited about that. That'll be a fun discussion.
It'll be a very fun discussion. Yeah, I'm glad that one will happen in person with everybody. I'm going to go back to your twinning point, Matt, because similar to the hoof health and the calf health, twins should be recorded in your farm system, just like also dead cows, right? When we look at the population, we need to have a good representation of the population. And that is a key factor in being able to evaluate a future twinning evaluation is having good data on the frequency of twins in the herd. Okay, we're gonna shift just a little bit beyond the pack side of this, Matt, and talk a little bit about some of that herd data that you're collecting. How are you using the herd data that you collect for, at the end of the day, genetic evaluations, but first for management decisions? Where is the value in that on as a first line of defense in taking care of your cows?
Well, it starts with, the old standby. Some of the first recordings we had were breeding information and conception data. So we've always monitored our conception data each month through our reports from DHIA, and we observe monthly changes. When you get to know more about the techniques that the council uses to do their evaluations, they figure monthly data in too. So it's all a part of the system. Within my herd, I use the data for, on bull proofs. I'll look at reproductive data because I don't want to have cows that are hard to breed. So I'm always continually watching my calving interval, length of time, my services per conception, my percent conception rate, and days open, days to first breeding. You monitor all that, and then between lactations, you're always looking for problem areas. So you would expect your 2-year-olds to have higher conception, but if your 2-year-olds are having a conception problem compared to your older cows, then maybe you had a bad batch of bulls in that area. You look to solve the problems because your younger animals should always settle better, and when you see discrepancies, you like to figure out why that is so you can correct it and make it better. I'm always looking at all that data on a monthly basis to try to see where we're at, where we're headed. Each inseminator has a category, so we're looking at who's doing the best. We have a little competition, see who's settling the best between us and our embryo transfer vet. He has a little edge on us because he's putting an actual confirmed pregnancy in, we always tell him. But we got to follow this data. And that's easy data to record because we ultrasound and then we record all our data. And now that a lot of processing centers allow you to record the sexier calf, that's kind of interesting. And then with the sex semen now, it's really important to code, sometimes you think, oh, I'm going to use this bull sex now, but because you remembered the old code, it's just easier to enter the old code, but then you lose information on the actual sex semen conception rate. So accuracy in data takes a little extra time, but it's worth it because then you can look back at your data and see where the issues are. So it's a kind of a mindset you get into once you start appreciating how easy it is to adjust for problems once they occur, and then just the overall contribution to the bulls you use. It just gotta make sense that we need to get this recorded correctly, not just to save money on genomic testing, but just for the betterment of the breed and the efficiency of milk production around the globe.
Matt, as you think about trying to convince other farmers that it's worth taking the time to collect that complete data picture, put it into your farm software, and then share it with the National Cooperative Database, what is the sales pitch there? How do you make that appeal to other producers or your peers to make that change or make that investment?
Well, it's as simple as thinking about, say you've used a bull and the daughters don't turn out good for some reason. Either they have mastitis problems or they have breeding problems, and your data isn't part of the system. You kind of want to make sure that that bull gets appropriately adjusted for that, because as sons come up and say the data wasn't recorded properly, then the sons won't have the right data, and then you might end up using another line of that family, and then you're going to go through the same problems again. So it's kind of self-preservation in a way of getting data recorded properly, because you're just contributing to the bulls that you're going to be using in the future. And I just don't think we realized how important data collection was day to day. In the old days when we were proving a bull with 100 daughters, and then we were using a few young sires to sample, and then we'd get a proof on a bull, and we get second crop daughters to verify how good he really was. But by then, we were on to the next bull. But once we figured out how interrelated the whole thing is, and that data feeds the system, and because we're a generation ahead using, the number of proven bulls use is limited now compared to genomic bulls, that we really count on this data being accurate to give us the right direction we're headed in. It'd be like picking stocks on the stock market without solid information. Okay, your chances of being successful are rather limited if you're just guessing. But having good information makes success throughout your operation. So you don't do a lot of things without having a little information. It's just common sense tells you that this data needs to be collected, and we all have to do it right. And I think once that's instilled amongst people and their herdsmen and their assistant herdsmen and the people that are in the calf rearing area, that, hey, just jot it down, or whoever's collecting the data, take a picture of it so you remember to tell them what happened, because we all have phones now, and a lot of the systems are becoming phone ready. So as you're around the farm, you can enter data, and that's the goal, is we can enter these quick little data things. When you see a problem or see something happen, you get it recorded. It wasn't as easy to record in the past because you entered everything on one sheet, handwritten, and when you have 1,000 cows to worry about, sometimes you get sidetracked before you get back to the office, and then that data, it gets lost. So having it in your hand, and getting it recorded is critical. And even if you don't have the ability to enter that data in the barn, you can take a picture so you don't forget what to do. I'm kind of old school, so I learn a lot every day, and then I forget how to enter it sometimes. But I ask questions. So
There we go.
anyway, the point being is we need the data. The data is critical to the system, and it's just a win all the way around, definitely.
Yeah. And as we wrap up here, Matt, our final question for the day. When you think, we can either think back or think forward, you can take your pick. But what has been the biggest way that our cows have changed throughout your career through genetics? Or what do you think is the biggest thing on the horizon? So again, look back or look forward, or you can do both. But where are those like big genetic changes from your
Well,
perspective?
well, first I'm going to look back because when I was in college and I spent time with my professor and he taught me how data was collected, with production and fat and protein, and then we started with type evaluation data, and and we didn't have a lot of health traits at that time, so these things all developed. So we were really good at getting cows to milk more, but we weren't foreseeing the the reduction in health we were going to bring into the population. And as we've developed these health traits, it's amazing to me to see the success that we've had in modifying the cow to be better, especially Semitic cell count, one of the early ones to be added. And there's a lot of different reasons why cows would have a problem with Semitic cell count. And we didn't always think about that, but it could be that they have teat end problems or they have collapsible teats and the milker squeaks and they tend to get mastitis. But just being able to identify what we can measure through our DHI testing has allowed us to fix it. And that's what's really neat about it. We don't have to specifically know what we're after. We just want the cattle that don't have that problem. So getting rid of the bad issues has been as important as developing the plus side. When I first started getting into the Holstein business in 1991, I couldn't figure out why do these Holsteins, they can't have a calf by themselves. What's wrong with these animals? They had, the calves were big, the calves would die being born, the heifer couldn't walk for a week after she had a calf. And so when calving ease data became available, we adapted early to that. And now we see the incidence of calving ease, as we talked about earlier in our discussion today, that we just hardly ever pull a calf unless there's some rare occurrence of a leg back or something like that that can happen. And another big one that everybody's enjoyed is the higher level of fat production within the Holstein breed. When we were getting paid $3 a pound for fat, we were all getting fat milk checks, so to speak. But now the emphasis has shifted to protein, and that's an area I'm assuming we will address moving forward within the pack is adjusting our indexes to account for some of these changes in pricing. One thing I've learned is there's more data out there than we're always exposed to. Not one formula fits all. So we need to reach out and think about and ask questions and find out, cheese merit, kind of important now with more protein being in the mix. We're going to see as technology increases on farms, the farms are getting bigger. We can't, like it or not, we're not going to stop it. Nobody stopped Walmart from getting big because it's a free market system. And generally speaking, herds get bigger just because the efficiencies are better. But as we get bigger herds, we need to have different ways to collect data. So that's the next challenge moving forward. How are we going to get this data, keep it in the system, keep it being relevant, But I think as some of the herds get bigger, they're understanding the importance of genetics already because as we've made forward progress, the signs are there. So I think people are going to adapt. We all learn as we go along. I see a bright future for this data and the use of it, and as we develop more tools through the council, we're lucky in this country to have an organization that gives us this kind of support genetically in a fair, balanced system. And it's second to none in the world, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
We are very, very glad to have you a part of the committee and a part of the feedback loops that CDCB fosters into the industry. So thank you for all of your time, Matt. Thank you for today, for this great conversation. And I look forward to all of the conversations we will continue to have off camera throughout the year with the PAC. Thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us today for the CDCB CowCast. And again, thank you, Matt, for being our guest today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Appreciate it. Thanks again, Katie.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the CDCB CowCast. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you are streaming. Questions or comments about the topic covered in this episode can be sent to outreach@uscdcb.com. That's outreach@uscdcb.com. Or you can send us a message at the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding on Facebook and LinkedIn. We look forward to hearing from you and see you again next month.